all right, where's the moisture? And he goes, well, what we do is, we usually plant with this plow, and we set the depth of that. And it's a plow that opens, and then the seed gets dropped, and then they have another tool or closer right behind it. And he goes, we usually set the depth based on, a hole that we dig to see where the moisture is in the soil. So sometimes they plant at 3 inches, sometimes it's 1 inch. It just depends on that given year and the moisture that was available in the soil at that time, at the planting time.
Right.
I didn't take that into consideration. I just assumed that the soil was moist. And he reminded me, Leighton, I can't drive on the soil if it's too moist because I'll leave ruts. And then when I go to harvest, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
So, this is often a situation when you're dealing with two different, entities, or not entities, but professions that are coming together to try to make something new work. And so in hindsight, what happened was the tubes were dragging along behind on the soil. They were on the soil, but the soil was hydrophobic. And so they were left to be exposed to wind and UV and sunlight, so it never penetrated. And that's why we had such a horrible delivery. So we've figured out a new way to do this effectively, like we did the first year, without doing 2 passes. Now, bless Kyle's heart, he took a huge hit this year. He was horribly depressed, or I shouldn't say he was horribly depressed, horribly frustrated. And, at one point he got to the point, he was like, I can't do this again. I'm going to have to go back to nitrogen. I can't take this kind of hit. I'm doing this to make a living, not to, give it away or do all this for nothing. And so when he started talking about that, I personally got a little depressed. I'm like, we made such great progress that first year, and to have a setback based on a misconception, misunderstanding, maybe we didn't talk enough or communicate the right way, it hurt, because he was, this was the pride and joy. He's had people come see what he had accomplished based on that. And so not only did it, strike me in the heart, and him in the heart, but, all the people that came out there, and he had a lot of people swinging by, checking his fields, and a lot of conversations with other farmers who were really genuinely interested in what he was doing.
Yes.
And so it was more than a setback. It was like a kick in the nuts. Like it stung. And so I kind of, smoothed it over, and, Kyle, you can't give up now. We've been working on this for 5 years. Just please, whatever you do, don't just go back to pure nitrogen. Let's, even if it's a hybrid, let's approach it this way. Let's say we do the 2-week test and we have the same results on the Protozoa, which I don't believe we will, because we have a new delivery method. But say we do. Say we do have a poor delivery. And you have a choice. You can deliver again, or you could side dress with nitrogen. And I'll leave that up to you. It's your farm, it's your business. I'm only here as a consultant to support you and hopefully help you move into a non-synthetic environment. And so in all of those conversations, out came the fact that he actually did have one field that had 300 bushel per acre, which is astounding. I mean, the best guys get is 220 an acre. And that was with biology. But the difference was that soil was not hydrophobic, and it was a different type of soil. It had a lot less clay in it. They call it black dirt out there. I would call it a silty soil, not right, because they call it because of the color, but I call it that because of what's actually in it. It's basically sandy silt, not clay silt, and a
lot more organic matter in it.
Well, there's definitely more organic matter for sure, and easier for the biology to penetrate. And on that field, we did have very good biological reports. I forget what the number was, but the interesting thing it took me down a rabbit hole that I had forgotten about. So there's this company called Earthfort that Dr. Lane Ingham started back in the 80s or 90s. It was her first, the world's first biological assay to better understand what part or how powerful the soil food web was in situ, in soil, in place. So this isn't in a lab. This is taking soil samples from any one location or multiple locations and sending them in, and then having them go through a series of protocols, and eventually comes back with a sheet that shows you what your bacteria are, what the level. Now, again, we're not into species, we're not into specifics, just overall. This is your biologicals, and that's very big diversity. So, and I won't get into the diversity conversation because that's where we're going with the ecosphere, which we'll get into later in the conversation. But bottom line, it told you your bacterial level, it told you your fungi, and they had active and inactive, which was kind of a nice feature. And then it said the F to B ratio. Then they got into protozoa. So that's where you see ciliates, which are the bad guys, and amoeba and flagellates. And so the theory was, if you figured out how many flagellates, or not, maybe not flagellates, but protozoa. So, and again, we're talking about the aerobic protozoa. If you got ciliates, then you didn't usually have very high nutrient cycling protozoa. Not that ciliates don't, but it's a different animal. So bottom line was that you would have an understanding of your fertility, your soil's fertility. And by that, I mean the pounds of nitrogen available or released over a 90-day period. And the reason they chose 90 days was because most crops are within 90 days. So you plant them and you harvest them. And so in honesty, I mean, that was a great approach to better understanding what the farmer or the client could expect for a result of their soil condition.
A potential, basically.
Well, no, this isn't potential. This is real. I mean,
okay,
it's not that it's the full potential, because and I can get into that in a minute too, because they do have a methodology that does show the potential. So in many ways, you have to be very careful in understanding that test that they did was showing the potential. Now, what is the chances of nature reaching that full potential? It varies tremendously. Weather, everything comes into factor. So ideally, that's probably not the best methodology, because you're showing what could happen, but you're not saying this is what's going to happen. Right. But I think the point I'm trying to make was that they came up with this algorithm, this formula, to better understand, based on what's there, its potential, then you can count on this to be what would be released. And so it became very beneficial to a lot of farmers, because they could say, oh, I have this potential, so I'm going to cut my nitrogen in half, or I'm going to cut it by 2/3, because I trust Elaine and I trust the system, and it works, right? It worked. So it gave the farmer another tool to decide whether they only used whatever less they needed based on the potential of their soil.
Right.